The rain falls in soft, gray sheets, a fine mist that settles on the black wool of coats and the polished mahogany of the casket. The air is thick with the scent of wet earth and expensive perfume. Under a canopy of trembling black umbrellas, the elite of the city stand gathered, a silent, respectful monument to the man being lowered into the ground. And apart from them, standing on the periphery where the manicured lawn gives way to the sodden soil, is Leo. He feels the damp seeping through the soles of his worn leather shoes, a familiar coldness. His suit, his only suit, is a decade out of fashion, the fabric thin at the elbows and knees. He keeps his calloused hands, the hands of a man who works with them, shoved deep into his pockets, a feeble defense against the chill and the sidelong glances. His siblings, Arthur and Clara, are a study in polished grief at the front of the crowd. Arthur's suit probably costs more than Leo's truck. Clara's tears look elegant, diamond-studded. They are the heirs, the successors, the public face of the family's vast empire. Leo is the ghost at the feast, the forgotten son, the one who had nothing to offer and so was offered nothing in return. The whispers don't quite reach him, but he feels them, a low hum of judgment. There he is, the one who left, the failure. He watches a clump of rich, dark soil land on the lid of his father's casket with a final, hollow thud. The sound is swallowed by the rain. He doesn't cry. His grief is a quieter, older thing, a constant companion worn smooth by years of silence. His mind drifts back, not to a single moment, but to a collage of slights, a lifetime of being on the outside looking in. He is 12, sitting at the long, gleaming dinner table. His father, Alistair, is at the head, a giant of a man whose voice could command boardrooms. He's asking Arthur about his grades, Clara about her ballet recital. His eyes slide over Leo as if he were a pane of glass. Leo's report card, tucked under his napkin, is all A's, but it doesn't matter. His achievements are quiet, academic, invisible. They don't translate into stock options or social leverage. He is 22, standing in this very house, the air crackling with tension. "It's a fool's errand, Leo," Alistair booms, his face flushed with a mixture of wine and disdain. "Working with your hands, building asterisk furniture. I built an empire from nothing and you want to be a common carpenter." Arthur, already a vice president at the company, smirks from the doorway. Clara looks pitying. Leo had tried to explain that it wasn't just furniture. It was art, it was integrity, it was building something real and lasting with his own two hands, not just moving numbers on a screen. But his father saw only a rejection of his legacy. The argument ended with Alistair's voice cracking like a whip. "If you walk out that door to pursue this asterisk poverty, don't expect a place at this table. You make your choice." Leo had chosen. He chose a small, sunlit workshop that smelled of sawdust and linseed oil. He chose a life of financial struggle, of patched jeans and simple meals. He chose freedom, but the cost was his family. The invitations to Christmas parties and summer holidays dried up. His phone calls went unanswered. For 10 years, he was a non-person in the world of Alistair Croft. But there was another memory, a secret one. A year ago, his father had shown up at his workshop unannounced. No chauffeur, no tailored suit. He looked smaller, older, the formidable presence diminished. He didn't say much. He just walked around, his fingers trailing over the smooth curve of a maple table Leo was finishing, the intricate dovetail joints of a cherrywood cabinet. "It's solid," Alistair had said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "It has weight." He stayed for an hour, sitting on a stool watching Leo work in silence. He didn't apologize, he didn't explain. But for the first time he truly saw what his son was building. He came back every few weeks. They never spoke of the past or the family. They talked about wood grain, about the right oil for teak, about the quiet satisfaction of a perfect joint. It was a fragile, unspoken truce, a connection built not on words but on the shared language of creation. Leo never told his siblings. He knew they wouldn't understand. They would only see a threat. The memory dissolves as the crowd begins to shift, moving like a slow, dark river back towards the imposing silhouette of the family mansion. The funeral is over. The real business of death is about to begin, the reading of the will. Leo hangs back, unsure if he's even welcome. Arthur catches his eye, his expression a mask of condescending sympathy. "You can come in, Leo," he says, his tone implying it's a magnanimous gesture. "For formality's sake." The study is a room Leo remembers as a boy, a place of intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive oak desk that felt like a continent, the scent of old leather and fine cigar smoke embedded in the very walls. Arthur and Clara take the plush leather chairs in front of the desk as if they are thrones. Their spouses stand behind them, a united front of expectation. Leo remains near the door, leaning against a bookshelf, feeling like an intruder. Mr. Thorne, the family lawyer for 40 years, is a man carved from the same stone as the house. He adjusts his spectacles and opens a leather-bound portfolio. The room falls silent, the only sound the soft patter of rain against the bay window. "This is the last will and testament of Alastair James Croft," Thorne begins, his voice dry and precise. He reads through the preliminary legalities. Then the bequests. $1 million to the City Symphony. $500,000 to the university's business school. Trust funds for the grandchildren, generous and expected. Then he comes to the family. "To my daughter, Clara Croft Williams, I leave the Aspen estate, its contents, and a 20% stake in Croft Global Enterprises." Clara lets out a soft, satisfied sigh, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. "To my son, Arthur Croft, I leave the majority controlling stake of 51% in Croft Global Enterprises, along with the title of Chief Executive Officer." Arthur's shoulders straighten, a king receiving his crown. He allows himself a small, tight smile, casting a glance around the room, already taking ownership. Leo looks down at his worn shoes. He expected nothing. He truly didn't. Yet a small, foolish part of him, the little boy who just wanted his father's approval, feels a fresh pang of loss. He had hoped perhaps for a token, a watch, a book, something that said, "I thought of you." Mr. Thorne clears his throat. The room is still. The main event is over, but the lawyer hasn't closed the folder. He looks up, his eyes finding Leo's across the room. There is a strange, unreadable emotion in his gaze. "There is a final codicil," Thorne says, his voice changing. The dry, legal tone softens, becomes almost personal. "A handwritten edition, witnessed and notarized by myself, dated just 6 weeks ago." He takes out a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper. The handwriting on it is bold, sprawling, unmistakably Alastair. "He asked that I read this aloud verbatim," Thorne says. He takes a breath, and when he speaks again, it is not his own voice he projects, but the ghost of Alastair Crofts filling the room. "If you are hearing this, then I am gone. And if Mr. Thorne is doing his job, you are all assembled in my study, Arthur, Clara, and Leo. I know you are there, son. I made sure of it." A ripple of confusion goes through the room. Arthur shifts uncomfortably. "For most of my life, I measured a man's worth by his balance sheet. I built a kingdom on that principle. I raised you, Arthur and Clara, to be its perfect princes and princesses. You learned the lessons well. You are ambitious, shrewd, and you understand the world of power and appearances. For that, I have provided for you handsomely, as the records of this will show. You have inherited the empire." He pauses, as if for effect, and Thorne's voice grows heavier, more emotional. "But an empire is just a shell. It is not a legacy. A legacy is built on truth. And the truth is, in my final years, I have come to see the world through a different lens. I saw the emptiness of yes men and the fragility of fortune. And I saw one person who possessed a wealth I had foolishly ignored." Leo, you are listening to this, probably thinking you are about to be given some small, sentimental trinket to placate you. You are wrong. Leo's head comes up. His heart is a frantic drum against his ribs. "You were the only one brave enough to defy me. You were the only one who valued your own soul over my money. While your siblings were vying for my favor, bringing me reports of profits and expansions, you were building things of lasting beauty and integrity. You asked for nothing. You took nothing. And in my loneliness, you gave me something. You gave me silence without judgment. You let me into your world, your simple, honest world of wood and craft, and you never once asked me for a thing. You showed me what dignity looks like. You showed me that the strongest foundations are not made of concrete and steel, but of character and quiet love. Clara lets out a small, sharp gasp. Arthur's face is pale, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle twitches in his cheek. So this is my truth, my final accounting. Arthur, Clara, you have the company, the houses, the stocks. You have everything I thought I ever wanted. But to Leo, I leave everything of true value. Mr. Thorne pauses, letting the words hang in the air, thick and shocking. I leave him this house, the Croft Manor and all its contents. I leave him the entirety of my liquid assets, the cash, the bonds, the art collection. I leave him the private trust, which holds the remaining 30% of the company, making him the single largest minority shareholder, whose approval will be required for any major corporate decision. The room erupts in a chaos of whispered exclamations. "This is absurd," Arthur barks, standing up. "He wasn't in his right mind. This is the work of a manipulator." He glares at Leo, his eyes full of venom. But Mr. Thorne isn't finished. He holds up a hand for silence, his gaze fixed on the paper. "Leo, my boy," the letter continues, the handwriting seeming to soften on the page, "this is not a reward for your poverty. It is an apology for my blindness. It is my attempt to finally, truly see you. Do with it what you will. Sell it all and go back to your workshop if it makes you happy. Or use it to build something new, something with a soul. You were always the richest of us all. You just never knew it. I love you, son. Forgive me." The final words land not with a shout, but with a profound, echoing silence. It is a silence that swallows Arthur's sputtering rage and Clara's shocked tears. All eyes are on Leo. He doesn't move. He stands by the bookshelf, his body trembling, the weight of his father's words crashing over him. It isn't the money, the house, the power. It is the words, "I see you. I love you. Forgive me." A lifetime of longing, of invisible striving culminates in this moment. He brings a rough, calloused hand to his face, pressing his fingers against his eyes to stop the tears, but they come anyway, hot and silent, tracing paths through the dust of the workshop still on his skin. He doesn't look at his siblings' faces, contorted in disbelief and greed. He doesn't feel triumph. He feels a deep, aching sorrow for all the wasted years and a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. The truth, held secret in his father's heart, had finally been set free. Arthur storms out, muttering about lawyers and contests. Clara follows, weeping with a different kind of grief now. The room empties until it is just Leo and Mr. Thorne. The lawyer carefully slides the letter and a heavy, brass key across the desk. "It's all yours, Leo," he says gently. He was very specific. He was of perfectly sound mind, the soundest I'd seen him in years. Leo nods, unable to speak. He picks up the key. It is cold and heavy in his palm. He walks out of the study, through the grand, empty halls that are now his, and out the front door. The rain has eased to a gentle drizzle. The world is washed clean, the colors deeper, the air sweeter. He walks back to his father's fresh grave, standing alone before the mound of flowers and wet earth. He places a hand on the cold, marble headstone. "I forgive you, Dad," he whispers, his voice raw. "Thank you for seeing me." He turns and walks away, not back into the mansion, but down the long driveway towards the town. He doesn't know what he will do with the house, the money, the power. That is a decision for another day. For now, he just holds the key in his pocket and feels the weight of a burden he never knew he was carrying finally lift from his shoulders. He is not the poor son anymore. He is the heir to a truth, and that is a wealth no one can ever take from him. He walks into the softening light, a man finally seen, his legacy not one of riches but of redemption, a quiet testament to the fact that the most powerful inheritances are not written in wills, but in the unspoken love that finally finds its voice. And as the screen fades on his retreating figure, a question hangs in the air, gentle and insistent, for all of us to carry home. What would you do if the world only learned your true value after you were gone? The heavy oak door of Croft Manor clicked shut behind Leo, sealing him into a silence that was both immense and unfamiliar. The grand foyer, with its vaulted ceiling and a staircase that swept upward like a marble waterfall, had always been a place of judgment. Now, it was just empty. The ghosts of 1,000 childhood slights seemed to hover in the dust motes dancing in the gray afternoon light. He could still hear the echo of Arthur's furious exit, the slam of a car door, the squeal of tires on the wet gravel, the sound of a dynasty rejecting its new, unwilling king. He didn't belong here. The thought was as instinctive as breathing. This was a museum of his father's ambition, a monument to a version of success he had consciously rejected. He walked slowly, his worn shoes silent on the Persian rug, his hand trailing over the carved balustrade. He found himself drawn not to the master suite or the study where power had been brokered, but to a small sunroom at the back of the house, a place his mother had loved. It was shabbier than the rest of the house, the wicker furniture fraying, the plants long since withered. It felt real. In his pocket, the brass key felt like a lodestone, pulling him toward a future he couldn't envision. He pulled it out, the metal warmed by his skin. It was just a key, but it unlocked more than a door. It unlocked the final, hidden chamber of his father's heart. "You were always the richest of us all. You just never knew it." The words replayed in his mind, not as a victory fanfare, but as a quiet, devastating melody. All those years of scraping by, of choosing integrity over a paycheck, of lying awake at night wondering if his father's disdain was justified. And all along, the old man had been watching, measuring, and in the end, recalculating the entire worth of a human soul. Leo hadn't won. He had been seen. And being seen, after a lifetime of invisibility, was a more destabilizing force than any financial windfall. His phone buzzed, a stark, modern sound in the antique silence. He didn't need to look to know it was Arthur or Clara or their lawyers. The siege was beginning. He ignored it, the vibration a dull tremor against his thigh before it faded. He wasn't ready for that war. He doubted he ever would be. His father hadn't given him this legacy to wage the same petty battles he'd spent his life fighting. Alistair had bequeathed him the power to end them. He rose and moved through the house again, this time with a purpose. He climbed the stairs, not to the opulent bedrooms, but to the third floor, to the small, plain door that led to the attic. This was a place he remembered from boyhood, a realm of forgotten things and secret adventures. The air was thick with the scent of cedar and old paper. Light filtered through a single, grimy dormer window, illuminating floating dust like tiny galaxies. And there, in the center of the vast, open space, shrouded in a white dust sheet, was a shape he recognized. His breath caught. He walked over and pulled the sheet away in a soft asterisk whoosh asterisk of displaced air. It was his father's old wooden dinghy. He remembered it from summers long gone, before the Empire consumed everything. Alistair, younger, less burdened, teaching him how to sand the rails, how to apply the varnish in long, smooth strokes. They had spent a whole summer restoring it together, just the two of them. It was the last project they had ever shared. After that, the boat had been stored away, and his father had disappeared into the labyrinth of his business, and Leo had become the son who didn't fit. He ran a hand over the gunwale. The varnish was cracked and cloudy, the wood dry, but the structure was sound. It was a thing that had been built with care, with patience. It was, he realized with a jolt, not so different from the furniture in his workshop. Taped to the inside of the hull was a sealed manila envelope. His name was written on it in his father's hand. With trembling fingers, he pried it open. Inside wasn't a legal document. It was a letter and a photograph. The photograph was faded, curled at the edges. It showed a boy of no more than 10, Leo, beaming with pride, holding a paintbrush too big for his hand. Next to him, a younger Alistair had his arm around the boy's shoulders, smiling a genuine, unguarded smile Leo had almost forgotten existed. He unfolded the letter. Leo asterisk. If you're reading this, you found the boat, and you've heard my other letter. I suppose by now the house is in an uproar. Arthur will be threatening to sue the firm into oblivion. Clara will be crying to anyone who will listen. Let them. They have what they wanted. They have the machine, but you have the heart of it. I've been sitting in this attic for an hour now, looking at this old thing. I remember your small hands, so serious, working beside mine. I remember the smell of the varnish and the sound of your laughter. I let that get away from me. I traded that for corner offices and shareholder meetings. It was a bad trade, son. The worst I ever made. This boat is my first apology. The will is my last. I don't expect you to live in this mausoleum. Sell it. Tear it down. Fill it with the beautiful things you make. I don't care. The money isn't for you to become me. It's for you to be free to become more of yourself. Use it to build a bigger workshop. Fund artists and craftsmen who have integrity but no platform. Be the patron I never was. The 30% stake in the company is your leverage. Use it to force Arthur to run the business with a conscience. Make him remember that companies are made of people, not just profits. He'll listen to you because he has to. You hold the soul of his empire in your hands. Don't let him forget it. I am an old man sitting in the dust trying to sand down the rough edges of a lifetime of mistakes. It's too late for me to fix most of it, but it's not too late for you. Be the man I pretended to be. Build things that last. Love deeply. Forgive an old fool his pride. With all the love I failed to show, asterisk. Dad. Leo sank to his knees on the dusty floorboards, the letter pressed to his chest. The sobs came then, not the silent tears of the study, but great, heaving waves of grief and release. He cried for the lost summers, for the father who had finally come home too late, for the little boy in the photograph who had just wanted to be loved. He cried until the last of the old, hard shell around his heart cracked and fell away, leaving him raw and new. When the storm passed, he felt lighter than he had in 20 years. He wiped his face with his sleeve, leaving smudges of dust and tears. He looked from the photograph to the dilapidated boat, and a slow, sure smile spread across his face. A purpose, clear and true, began to form in the quiet of the attic. He knew what he would do. He spent the next few hours not on the phone with bankers but with his own hands. He found cans of old varnish and sandpaper in a storage closet. He opened the dormer window to let in the fresh, rain-washed air, and he began to work. The rhythmic scrape of sandpaper, the familiar scent of citrus and pine, it was a meditation. He was not Leo Croft, the unexpected billionaire. He was Leo, the craftsman. Restoring something broken, something that had once held joy. As dusk began to paint the sky in shades of violet and orange, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number he knew well, his foreman, Mike, from the small custom furniture cooperative he worked with. Leo, you okay? Heard the news, it's all over the financial channels. Reclusive son inherits Croft fortune. Wild stuff. Leo smiled, the sound of a friendly voice a balm. I'm okay, Mike. Better than okay. So what happens now? You gonna buy a private island and retire? Leo looked around the attic, at the boat slowly emerging from under layers of neglect, at the photograph propped against a beam. No, Leo said, his voice firm and clear. No, I'm coming back to work. In fact, I'm going to need a bigger workshop, a lot bigger, and I'm going to need to hire. We're starting a foundation. He could almost hear Mike's grin through the phone. A foundation for what? For building things that last, Leo said, his gaze falling on his father's final words. And for second chances. He ended the call and walked to the window. The lights of the city were beginning to twinkle in the distance, a kingdom he now partially owned. But his eyes were drawn to the quiet, dark line of the river beyond the estate grounds. He imagined the little dinghy, restored and gleaming, floating on that water. He imagined it not as an ending, but as a beginning. The key was still in his pocket, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt like a tool. The mansion behind him was no longer a prison of old memories, but a resource, a vessel. He would not live in it. He would transform it. He would turn its ballrooms into galleries for local artists, its kitchens into culinary incubators, its vast lawns into a public park. He would use the machine of his father's empire to fuel the soul of his own vision. He was the poor son everyone ignored, but now he was rich in a way that mattered. He had his father's love finally and irrevocably. He had his integrity intact and valued, and he had a purpose, gifted to him from beyond the grave. He stood there for a long time, watching the day surrender to the night, feeling not like an heir to a fortune, but like a man who had just been given back his own life, with interest. And in the quiet of that moment, the story completes its circle, not with a bang of triumph, but with the soft, sure stroke of a sanding block, the quiet promise of a boat waiting for the water, and the enduring truth that the greatest legacies are not written in stone, but mended by hand and earned by heart. The following morning, the world had not so much changed as sharpened. The light falling through the dusty attic window seemed cleaner, the colors of the old boats would grain more distinct. Leo woke stiff from a night spent on a rolled-out sleeping bag, but a profound sense of calm had settled in his bones. The frantic buzzing of his phone had ceased, replaced by a single terse text from a number he didn't recognize but knew belonged to Arthur's lawyer. "We need to talk. Today." He ignored it. There were more important things to do. He spent the morning in the cavernous kitchen, brewing coffee in a simple pot he found buried in a cabinet, the silence of the house a companion rather than an accuser. He then returned to the attic, to the boat. The work was his anchor. Each stroke of the sandpaper was a word in a silent conversation with his father, smoothing away the decades of neglect, revealing the strong, beautiful grain beneath. He wasn't erasing the past. He was restoring it, finding the original shape hidden under the cracked varnish of time. In the afternoon, he drove his old truck into the city, not to the glittering towers of Croft Global, but to the industrial district, to his workshop. The familiar scent of sawdust and linseed oil was a homecoming. His small team, Mike, a burly ex-carpenter with a heart of gold, and Alina, a fiercely talented young woodworker with an artist's eye, looked up as he entered, their expressions a mixture of concern and awe. "So it's true," Mike asked, putting down a chisel. "You're the ghost king of the Croft Empire." "Something like that," Leo said, a small smile playing on his lips. He walked over to his current project, a conference table of reclaimed walnut, its live edge preserved. He ran a hand over the silky surface. "I need to talk to you both." He laid it out simply, not the drama of the will but the intent behind it. He spoke of his father's letter, of the boat, of the idea of a foundation not as a charity but as an engine for craftsmanship. "He didn't give me this to sit in a boardroom," Leo said, his voice gaining strength. "He gave it to me to build, to protect what's real. I want to buy this whole building, expand, start a school, a gallery, a place where people can learn that value isn't just a number on a screen." Alina's eyes shone. "A sanctuary for the rest of us," she whispered. "A workshop for the world," Leo corrected gently. "And I want you two to run it with me." The vote was unanimous, sealed not with a handshake, but with the resuming whir of a table saw and the sharp, sweet scent of freshly cut cherry wood. It was the first brick in his new foundation. The meeting with Arthur and his lawyers came 2 days later, in the very study where the will had been read. The air was frigid with hostility. Arthur sat flanked by 3 men in suits so sharp they seemed capable of drawing blood. Leo came alone. "This is preposterous, Leo, and you know it," Arthur began, dispensing with any pretense of civility. "The psychological manipulation of a dying man is a felony. We have psychiatrists ready to testify to undue influence. We will tie this estate up in probate for a decade. You'll be an old man before you see a dime, and you'll have spent every cent you have on legal fees." Leo listened, his hands resting calmly on the arms of his chair. He let the threats hang in the air, let them dissipate like smoke. He looked not at the lawyers but at his brother. He saw the fear behind the anger, the terror of a man who had built his entire identity on a legacy that had just been publicly deemed hollow. When Arthur finally fell silent, breathing heavily, Leo spoke, his voice quiet but unwavering. "I'm not here to fight you, Arthur." Arthur scoffed. "Don't be naive." I'm here to make you an offer. Leo leaned forward. You keep the company, all of it. The CEO title, the controlling stake. Run it as you see fit. The lawyers exchanged confused glances. Arthur stared, suspicion etched on his face. What's the catch? The catch is my 30%, Leo said. I'm not giving it to you, I'm keeping it, but I will sign a binding voting agreement. On all major decisions, mergers, acquisitions, ethical directives, I will vote my shares with you, the CEO. You will have the unified control you always wanted. In exchange for what? Arthur asked, his voice a low growl. In exchange for two things, Leo said. First, you drop all legal challenges. The house, the assets, they are mine, free and clear. Second, the company establishes and fully funds the Alistair Croft Foundation for the Practical Arts, with a board seat for me. You fund the school, the workshops, the grants for artisans. You use the machine to fuel the soul. Silence. Arthur's lawyers began whispering furiously, calculating the numbers, the power dynamics. It was a brilliant move. It gave Arthur the operational freedom he craved while costing him a fraction of what a protracted legal battle would. More importantly, it gave him a way to save face. He would be the magnanimous brother, honoring his father's quirky final wish, consolidating his power. Arthur studied Leo, a new, grudging respect in his eyes. He had expected a battle of attrition from a sentimental craftsman. He was not prepared for a strategic masterstroke from a man who understood leverage, not as financial clout, but as moral currency. You're smarter than you look, Leo, Arthur finally said, the fight draining out of him. I had a good teacher, Leo replied, his gaze drifting to the empty chair behind the desk. Do we have a deal? A long pause, then a curt nod. We have a deal. The paperwork took weeks, but the war was over before it began. Leo moved out of the mansion immediately, placing it in the hands of a property manager with instructions to prepare it for its new public life. He didn't need a monument. He needed a workshop. He rented a small, modest apartment overlooking the river, its only luxury being the light that flooded the main room each morning. His life, in its daily rhythms, didn't change dramatically. He still woke early, still worked with his hands, still ate simple meals. But the oppressive weight of being the poor son was gone, replaced by the liberating burden of purpose. One evening, a month after the deal was finalized, he and Mike launched the restored dinghy into the river. The varnish gleamed in the setting sun, the wood warm and alive under Leo's touch. They rowed out to the middle of the current, the lights of the city reflecting on the dark, placid water. It's a good boat, Mike said, breaking the comfortable silence. Solid. Leo nodded, his hand trailing in the cool water. He thought of his father's words, of the photograph, of the long, lonely road that had led to this moment of peace on the water. He hadn't sought this. He had only sought to live a life of integrity. The fortune, the power, the vindication, they were all unexpected byproducts. The real inheritance had been the restoration of that connection, the proof that love, even when unspoken, never truly dies. He looked back at the skyline, at the tower bearing his family's name. He didn't feel like its master. He felt like its keeper. He had taken the broken pieces of his father's legacy, the guilt, the regret, the late blooming love, and he was building something new from them. Something that would outlast stock prices and quarterly reports. Something with a soul. As they rowed back to shore, the first stars appearing in the violet sky, Leo knew the story wasn't about a poor son who became rich. It was about a lost son who was finally found. And in the quiet rhythm of the oars dipping into the water, in the sturdy feel of the restored wood beneath him, he found the only closure that ever really matters, the peace of a heart that has, at long last, come home. The Foundation's launch was a quiet affair, held not in a glittering hotel ballroom but in the raw, open space of the new workshop. The air, thick with the scent of fresh lumber and brewing coffee, was a stark contrast to the perfumed sterility of his father's world. The attendees were not titans of industry, but local artisans, wide-eyed students from the vocational high school, and journalists from small, independent publications who cared more about the story than the stock price. Leo stood before them, not on a raised dais, but on the same worn floorboards as everyone else. He wore a simple, clean work shirt, his hands, still calloused, still bearing the faint stains of yesterday's stain, resting at his sides. "I'm not a CEO," he began, his voice calm and carrying easily in the resonant space. "I'm a carpenter. My father was a great man who built an empire, but in his final days he taught me that the most important things we build aren't made of steel and glass. They're made of skill, of patience, of the quiet dignity that comes from creating something with your own two hands." He spoke of the foundation not as a charity, but as a partnership, of apprenticeships that would pair master woodworkers with kids who'd never held a chisel, of microloans for artisans to start their own small businesses, of a gallery space where the beauty of functional art could be celebrated. He announced that Croft Manor would be converted into a public center, its gates forever open, its halls filled with the sounds of learning and creation, not whispered deals. There was no triumphant applause, but a deep, resonant silence, followed by a murmur of genuine excitement. A grizzled old furniture maker with eyes like chips of flint nodded slowly, a gesture of respect more valuable than any standing ovation. A young woman with colorful tattoos snaking up her arms looked like she'd been handed a key to a kingdom she never knew existed. This was his work now. This was the boat he was building. The following months were a whirlwind of purposeful activity. Leo divided his time between his own craft, the one that fed his soul, and the architecture of the foundation. He discovered a talent for this new kind of building, forging connections, spotting potential, quietly steering resources to where they would do the most good. He was not a charismatic leader, but a thoughtful one. People trusted him because his hands were never entirely clean. They always bore the honest marks of his work. One afternoon, he was in his office, a glass-walled box overlooking the main workshop floor, reviewing applications for the first round of grants. Elena knocked and entered, her expression unreadable. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "It's your sister." Clara stood in the reception area, looking profoundly out of place in a cream-colored designer coat. She seemed smaller than he remembered, the sharp edges of her elegance softened by what looked like genuine unease. "Leo," she said, her voice tight. "Clara," he gestured to his office, "would you like to come in?" She followed him, her eyes taking in the simple space, the plans pinned to a corkboard, the half-finished model of the Croft Manor renovation on a side table. She didn't sit. "I'm not here because of Arthur," she said quickly, as if disarming a bomb. "He's acclimating. The board is pleased with the stability your agreement brought. The stock is up." "I'm glad to hear it," Leo said neutrally. A long, awkward silence stretched between them. Clara fidgeted with the handle of her purse. "I read about the foundation in the paper," she finally said, her gaze fixed on the model. "Turning the house into all that, it's surprising." "It's what he wanted," Leo replied. "It's in the letter." "I know," she took a shaky breath. "I've read it many times." She finally looked at him and her eyes were glistening. "He said we had the empire, but you had the heart of it. I thought it was just sentimental nonsense. But then I started seeing the articles, the photos of the people you're helping. That young potter you funded, the one who makes those incredible crystalline glazes. I have one of her vases in my home. I look at it every day." She fell silent, struggling for words. Leo waited, the hum of the workshop a gentle soundtrack to her turmoil. "I was so angry with him," she whispered, a single tear tracing a path through her perfect makeup. "And with you, I thought he'd lost his mind, but he didn't, did he? He finally found it, and I was so busy being the perfect daughter I forgot to be a daughter at all. I never went to see him, not like you did." The confession hung in the air, raw and unvarnished. It was the first honest thing she had said to him in over a decade. "You were living the life he designed for you, Clara," Leo said, not with forgiveness but with understanding. "It's a powerful trap." Can I? She hesitated, wiping her cheek with a gloved finger. Can I see it, the boat? He led her out of the office, through the workshop, to a place of honor near the large windows overlooking the river. The dinghy sat there, fully restored, its wood glowing with a deep, honeyed luster. Clara reached out, her perfectly manicured hand hovering just above the gunwale as if afraid to touch it. I remember this, she breathed. I'd forgotten. You and he were out in the garage for hours. Mother was furious he was missing a donor dinner. A small, sad smile touched her lips. He smelled like varnish for a week. She looked from the boat to Leo, her expression a complex map of regret and dawning clarity. He was happy then, wasn't he? With you. He was, Leo said softly. She nodded, a quiet acceptance settling over her. The foundation. If there's ever anything I can do, I'm good at organizing things, galas, that sort of thing. It was a clumsy offer, but it was sincere. I'll keep that in mind, Leo said. Thank you, Clara. She left soon after, a solitary figure in white retreating through a world of raw wood and honest labor. She didn't get back into a chauffeured car. She just walked down the street, her head bowed in thought. It wasn't a reconciliation, not yet. But it was a beginning. A crack of light under a door that had been sealed shut for a very long time. That evening, Leo sat on the dock behind his apartment, the water lapping softly at the pylons. He held his father's final letter, the paper now soft from being handled. He didn't need to read it anymore. He had the words memorized. Be the man I pretended to be. Build things that last. He looked out at the river, the lights of the city twinkling on the far shore. He thought of the workshop buzzing with life, of Clara's tentative visit, of the boat that was no longer a relic of a lost past, but a beacon for a reclaimed future. He had not sought to dismantle his father's empire, but to redeem it, to inject its vast, impersonal wealth with meaning, with soul. The inheritance had not been a prize, it had been a tool, and he was finally learning how to use it. The poor son was gone. In his place was a man who understood his own wealth, a man building a legacy not of brick and mortar, but of second chances and restored connections, one quiet, deliberate stroke at a time. The water flowed on, dark and endless, carrying the reflection of the lights and the silent, sturdy promise of the boat, ready for whatever journey came next. The change, when it came, was not in a boardroom coup or a dramatic headline, but in the quiet of Leo's workshop on a Tuesday. Arthur stood in the doorway, his silhouette sharp and unfamiliar against the soft, golden light of the afternoon. He didn't announce himself. He just stood there, watching as Leo guided a piece of bird's-eye maple through a planer, the machine whirring, a ribbon of translucent wood curling up and out like a delicate, aromatic flower. Leo shut off the machine, and the sudden silence was profound. He looked at his brother, not with defiance or expectation, but with a simple, weary acknowledgement. Arthur stepped inside, his polished Oxford silent on the sawdust-covered floor. His eyes, usually so full of calculated intensity, scanned the space, the ranks of hand tools hanging in precise order, the half-finished pieces smelling of cedar and sweat, the restored dinghy gleaming in its corner like a shrine. Clara said I should come, Arthur said, his voice tight, the words an admission of weakness. She said it would help. Leo said nothing. He picked up a rag and began wiping the fine dust from his hands. Arthur's gaze finally settled on the boat. He walked over to it, his movements stiff. He didn't touch it, he just stared. He never took me out on this, Arthur said, and the statement was stripped of all its usual arrogance, leaving only the bare, painful truth of a neglected son. He took you. I remember. I was supposed to be studying for my SATs. He said the water was a distraction, that my focus needed to be on the future. Leo remained silent, allowing the memory to hang in the air between them, heavy and real. I built my entire life on what he told me that day, Arthur continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Focus, ambition, the future, and he gave it all to you. He finally turned to look at Leo, and the anger was there, but it was brittle, a thin shell over a deep well of confusion and hurt. Why? Because you sanded a boat, Because you played the humble pauper. Leo placed the rag down carefully. He met his brother's gaze. No, Arthur, it wasn't the boat. It was because I was there. At the end, when he was just a tired old man, not a titan. You and Clara were running the empire he built. I was the only one left to see the man who built it. He walked to a small, locked cabinet near his desk. He took a key from his chain, unlocked it, and pulled out a simple, leather-bound journal. It wasn't his father's official log. It was something more personal. He started keeping this after he first came to my workshop, Leo said, holding it out. He didn't give it to me. I found it in his desk after the will was read. I think he meant for me to find it. Arthur hesitated, then took the journal as if it were a live grenade. He opened it. The handwriting was his father, but looser, less controlled. October 12th. Spent the afternoon at Leo's shop. The silence there is different. It's a productive silence, not the dead silence of an empty office after everyone has gone home to their families. He was working on a chair, just a simple maple chair. But the way he looked at the joint, the care he took, it was like he was listening to the wood. I have spent my life telling people what to do. I have never listened to anything. November 3rd. Arthur's quarterly report is a masterpiece of corporate strategy. He has identified 3 new markets for acquisition. He is everything I trained him to be. So why do I feel nothing but a cold pride? When Leo showed me a dovetail joint he'd cut by hand, I felt warmth, a sense of something permanent. December 18th. I asked Leo today if he ever regretted his choice. He just smiled that quiet smile of his and said, "How can I regret a choice that let me be myself? I have never been myself. I have always been Alistair Croft, CEO. I wonder if Arthur ever feels like just Arthur." Arthur's hands trembled. He flipped a few more pages, his eyes scanning the raw, unvarnished confessions. The entries were a chronicle of a man dismantling his own myth, and in the process, seeing his children for the first time, clearly and without the filter of his own ambition. Arthur is a brilliant reflection of my worst instincts. Leo is a quiet repudiation of my best ones. He snapped the journal shut, his knuckles white. He couldn't look at Leo. He stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped, the impeccable posture of a CEO finally broken. "He was proud of you," Leo said softly. "In his way. He just didn't know how to be proud of you without also being proud of the monster he'd created in himself." A harsh, ragged sound escaped Arthur's throat. It was half a sob, half a laugh. "All I ever wanted was for him to look at me the way he looked at you in that damned boat picture." "I know," Leo said, "and all I ever wanted was for him to look at me at all." The 2 brothers stood in the workshop, the shared truth of their separate isolations finally bridging the chasm between them. The empire, the money, the will, it all shrunk to insignificance next to this simple, devastating understanding. They had both been starving for the same love, from the same man who hadn't known how to give it. Arthur placed the journal gently on a workbench as if it were made of glass. "The foundation," he began, clearing his throat. "The board has approved the next round of funding, unanimously." "Thank you," Leo said. Arthur gave a curt nod. His mask of control slowly reassembling itself, but it was different now. The edges were softer. "I should go." He walked to the door, then paused, his back to Leo. "The chair you were working on, the maple one he wrote about, do you still have it?" "It's in my apartment," Leo said. "I finished it." Arthur didn't turn around. Would you consider letting me buy it?" "It's not for sale, Arthur," Leo said. "But you can have it, it's yours." Arthur stood perfectly still for a long moment. Then, without another word, he left, stepping out of the golden warmth of the workshop and back into the gray world. Leo didn't watch him go. He looked instead at the journal on the bench, then at the boat, and finally at his own hands. The revelation was complete. The legacy was no longer a burden to be carried or a fortune to be managed. It was a story, a complicated, painful, and ultimately beautiful story of a father and his 3 children. and his part in it was not to be the hero but the keeper, the one who would ensure that the heart of the story, the fragile human truth at its center, was never lost again. He picked up a piece of the bird's-eye maple, feeling its perfect, intricate pattern under his thumb, and he went back to work. The years did not pass so much as they accumulated, like the fine, cherished patina on a well-used workbench. The Croft Foundation became a quiet force in the city, a bedrock of stability and soul in a world increasingly frantic and virtual. The old manor, now the Croft Center for the Practical Arts, thrummed with a life its builder could never have imagined. The ballroom echoed with the sounds of welding and the whir of pottery wheels. The formal dining room was now a communal kitchen where culinary students from underfunded schools learned their craft. Children's laughter rang in the gardens, where once only the rustle of financial newspapers could be heard. Leo, now in his late 40s, his hair shot through with silver but his hands as steady as ever, moved through this world as its quiet architect. He still kept a small, personal workshop on the top floor of the center, a sanctuary above the beautiful chaos. He was no longer the poor son, nor was he the billionaire craftsman. He was simply Leo, the man who fixed things. One crisp autumn morning, a young journalist arrived for an interview. She was working on a piece about legacy businesses, and the Croft story, with its dramatic twists, was a central case study. She found Leo not in an office, but in his workshop, fitting a new runner onto a delicate, antique rocking chair a visitor had broken the week before. He offered her tea, poured from a thermos into a simple clay mug. She was struck by his stillness, the lack of urgency that seemed to radiate from him. She asked her prepared questions about corporate structure and the challenges of scaling a nonprofit. He answered thoughtfully, but his answers always circled back to the same theme: integrity of materials, integrity of purpose. Frustrated, she finally put her notebook down. With all due respect, Mr. Croft, most legacy stories are about expansion, building bigger. Your story seems to be about distillation. You had an empire and you boiled it down to this. She gestured around the workshop. Why? Leo put down his sanding block. He looked at the chair, then out the large window at the people moving through the courtyard below. My father spent his life building a monument to himself, he said, his voice calm. He thought it was made of money and power, but in the end he discovered it was made of people, of connection. This, he said, nodding to the room, the building, the city beyond, isn't a smaller version of his empire. It's the completion of it. He laid the foundation with concrete and steel. I'm just finishing the interior with something warmer. Later that day, his phone buzzed. It was Arthur. Their relationship had settled into a cordial, functional respect. They were not the kind of brothers who went on fishing trips, but they were partners in this shared, redeemed legacy. The board is pushing for another expansion into the Asian market, Arthur said, his voice crisp through the speakerphone. It's a solid proposal, profitable. Leo watched a group of schoolchildren below being led on a tour of the woodworking studio. What's the human cost? He asked. Their factory standards, the environmental impact. A sigh from Arthur. I'll have the team do a deeper dive. The Leo clause, he said, and there was no resentment in it, only a weary acceptance. It was their shorthand for the ethical framework Leo's shares enforced. Thank you, Arthur. Clara is organizing the annual gala, Arthur added, a hint of his old dryness returning. She's insisting on a rustic elegance theme. I think that's your fault. Leo smiled. I'll take the blame. He ended the call and returned to the rocking chair. As he worked, applying a thin, golden coat of oil to the repaired wood, he thought of his father's journal, which he now kept in a drawer beside his bed. He no longer needed to read it. He had lived its sequel. The revelation in the study all those years ago had not been an ending, but a germination. The seed of his father's late-found love had been planted in the barren soil of their family's history, and against all odds, it had grown. It had grown into this center, into the tentative peace with his siblings, into the quiet certainty in his own heart. He finished the chair, the wood now glowing with a soft inner light. He rocked it gently with his hand. It was steady. It was whole. The story of the poor son was over. It had been replaced by the story of a man who understood that the greatest wealth was not in what you accumulated, but in what you restored. The love between a father and a son. The dignity of honest work. The broken pieces of a family, carefully glued back together, the seams still visible but strong enough to hold. That evening he walked through the quiet center, turning off the lights. He paused in the main hall where his father's portrait now hung, not the stern, public one from the corporate office, but the photograph from the attic of the man and the boy with the boat, both of them smiling. The legacy was no longer a question of what was left behind, but of what was carried forward. And as Leo stepped out into the cool night, locking the door behind him, he knew he was carrying it just fine.